Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Michael Bruntz, joined by Brian Christopherson, fresh off a trip to Chicago, back from Chicago. What'd you do with all those suits?
Yeah, they were all hanging in my rental car, like you hang them up in that little hanger spot, and I had 4 of them ready to go, and didn't need them.
You had to keep the suits in the chamber.
Yeah.
So Nebraska basketball goes one and done in Chicago. We'll hit on that a little bit later. Mike Schaefer talked with Greg Biggins of the of the 247 Sports Network as we kind of continue our look at areas of the country that are going to be really important to Matt Rhule and this coaching staff on the recruiting trail. They're talking California. I don't know if Calibraska's back. I don't know if it has to be, but they're going to break down the opportunity there for Nebraska and Matt Rhule. So before we get to that, though, Nebraska basketball, one and done, and now playing the waiting game to see if there's a chance that basketball continues. What was I guess let's go through the game first. What did you kind of make of that performance? And, it seemed to me, 8 hours away that it just Nebraska just didn't have that kind of extra oomph that they've had over the last month or so.
Yeah, I mean, first off, they looked a little stiff on offense to me from the get-go, and this had been kind of a pretty when you're watching them on that end of the floor, you're like, I like the rhythm here. It had all been kind of working, and they had shot 58% at Iowa, and it was just if they could carry this over, they were going to be a really tough out. Even in the first 4 to 5 minutes of that game, Nebraska was up 8-0. And Minnesota just looked like a joke. I mean, they turned it over like 4 of the first 5 times or something like that. One of their passes went like 10 rows into the seats. It was just like we are watching a 14 seed here. But Nebraska didn't really take advantage of it as fully as they could have, I didn't think. And you could tell early on they just weren't crisp. Like even when Jamarcus Lawrence hit the 3 and got fouled, he like banked it in, and it was just sort of stuff that was maybe a little fortune was involved. And so when Minnesota finally got their act together and made a run, it just felt like from about the 10-minute moment of the first half that it was going to be trying to go uphill with ankle weights all night long. It really did. And Minnesota's a tough matchup, I think, in some ways. And I know people would roll their eyes at that because of Minnesota's record, but they can throw a pretty good 3, 4, 5 at you as far as bigs. And Nebraska obviously is in a bad way right now, especially when Blaise Cato was suited, but obviously wasn't really available. And I think he would have been a big help in this game. And I think Hoiberg thought that going in too, and it played out that way. And then Minnesota got hot, and took advantage of open shots. I think they hit 12 of 14 at one point, built up an 11-point lead. And then you kind of get in that mode where you've got to hit when you're trying to rally like Nebraska did. You got to hit that one shot when you have that moment. And there was like 4 or 5 or 6 of them where it felt like it's right there to be had. And I remember one in particular with about 5 or 6 minutes left. Griesel lines up for a 3. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if that goes down, I'm probably there another day and get to use another suit, Bruns. Because I feel like if they could have just tipped the scale at that moment and grabbed the lead, it would have been theirs, and they could never do it.
Yeah, it didn't even when they were down big in the second half, I never really felt like Minnesota was in complete control of that game. And I thought Nebraska was still getting pretty decent looks offensively in that second half. Like you said, you just couldn't get that big shot to fall. What did you playing a team for the third time? I mean, it just, I don't know, like in that second half, it just seemed like for the first time in a while that Nebraska they weren't the aggressor, I guess. And, you didn't really see him taking advantage of transition opportunities. It seemed like Fred was really trying to get them to speed things up when they had the chance. But, I mean, what do you think was kind of the 2 weird, what was it? The 2 offensive foul calls that were a little bit little bit dicey there at the end. But what did you kind of make, I guess, of the last couple minutes of that game and the way Nebraska kind of handled itself?
Yeah, I mean, first off, before you get to that, Nebraska was about 50% or so at the rim. I mean, they just didn't finish at the rim. Greasel got to the rim sometimes, but they didn't go down. Derek Walker got there and had a few that you would normally bank on him making. He plays at such a high efficiency, you're used to it, and it didn't happen. So there were these sort of empty trips building up to it that I think contribute to frustration, where it's like it's just one of those nights where you're not quite put in the period at the end of the sentence. But yet, you're right, with a minute 10 or so left, Nebraska gets the ball down to, and I think it was Casey who was called on one of them, the first one, for a moving screen. And Fred was hopping about it. It was right in front of him. He, of course, I always feel, how these go in the post game. It's like such a big play that you sort of have to like bring it up to the coach to like, hey, can you address this publicly in some manner, even while not getting fined? So I did that. I asked him,
Yeah.
I know you can't only say so much, but what was the explanation? You always ask that, like, what was the explanation given you? And they're like, well, yeah, it was a moving screen. It's sort of this game you play.
I got to go back and watch more film.
Yeah,
Watch it on tape. Yeah.
wink, wink. I don't know if one of them might have been a good call. I think Lawrence got called on the second one, and maybe there's some truth to it. That was the right call, but it was a weird time to see all of a sudden two offensive fouls on screens called. You don't see it all game hardly, and then in this moment, it's like back to back, and that'll obviously draw the ire of the Husker fan base. And so, yeah, in both those times, it was a 2-point game, and Nebraska didn't even get an opportunity, to attack the hoop. And so that was huge. And then at the very end, 7 seconds left, down 2. Hoiberg didn't use the timeout, which I'm fine with because he has a point guard who's a veteran who had momentum going to the hoop.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was going to work out for him. But I do think the ball was off Sam after the replay showed it, right?
It looked like it was the right call. Yeah.
Yeah. With 1 second left. And that should have sealed it. And then Ben Johnson, for whatever reason, he actually at the last second, he didn't want his guy to make it, but it should have been so clear to Minnesota, like miss this intentionally and make Nebraska like throw a 75-footer, in.
Yep.
Instead, the guy makes the free throw, allows Nebraska, you can have some semblance of a play then where you inbound it and you've worked on something. And Casey, I thought it was good, Bruntz. Like when he let it go, and because he is that way, you're just like, yeah, he's going to like bank this in or something.
Yeah.
And it was right on line. So if he makes that, Nebraska, I think would have been tough to stop. They didn't take advantage when Battle fouled out with 9:03 left, and Ben Johnson again gift wrapped him points by throwing a tantrum about it. I like Ben Johnson, by the way, but that was bad coaching there. And Nebraska gets 4 free points, and that made it a 3-point game. I thought Nebraska was going to win at that point, and they just could not take advantage of opportunities that kind of kept popping up right in their reach.
So we're Friday morning. Do you expect that you're going to be covering NIT basketball at any point in the very near future?
I mean, we're all sort of just guessing at that, but it's even in the post-game room, you got the sense from Hoiberg and I think even the players to some degree that it's probably over.
Yeah.
I mean, there was sort of an understanding that some of the metrics that are being used aren't that favorable. So the committee would have to sort of push aside the net and some of that stuff as a major tool and say, no, this team won, 6 of their final 8 in the regular season. And there is something to be said for that. I mean, Fred had a comment about how Nebraska was one of the hottest teams in the league, and he's right. He said was in the past tense. He was recognizing they had a bad loss, but that was Nebraska's first loss to a quad 3 or quad 4 team all season. This is a team that played a very tough schedule that has 4 quad 1 wins as it stood Thursday. And that's more than a bunch of teams that will be playing in March. They had some 3 quad 2 wins, I believe, something like that. So, there's a resume there that you could argue that they belong in the tournament and the way they finished for the most part. It's a bad loss at the very end. But when you're looking at basketball resumes, you're looking at the full package of what this team is and was, the last month or two in particular. And it was a pretty good basketball team, Wednesday aside. So I think they have a case to be made, but do I think they're going to be in? My guess would be no.
The last couple of days, we've seen some things trickle out. Like Texas Tech, it sounds like, would not accept an NIT bid based on what's going on down there. North Carolina is probably in a similar boat of not wanting to play. It sounds like, but kind of big picture. Do you think? I got asked this yesterday. Do you think that the way that things played out this week, how does it kind of leave you thinking overall about the season?
I feel like it was a solid season, and that I think Hoiberg did a good coaching job this season. I think because he shifted gears several times. He shifted in the offseason of sort of the makeup of what his roster was going to be like, and they had more of a gritty defensive presence, on this team from the start. And then they had to remake themselves in January. And honest to goodness, I thought it was going to be just rough to watch the last 2 months. Like, they might end up with 12 wins or something. So the fact that they're at 16-16, let's not forget where most of us thought this would be, 6 weeks ago. I didn't think they'd be 500 for sure. So I think he's found a good coaching nucleus too, like with his assistants. So I like sort of what they're doing. And I think they've got some guys who can recruit, and they might be able to get 2 or 3 dudes. This is the way of college sports now. You got to find them now we go into that off season portion where you got to find those magic bullets or whatever, that can get you over the hump. And it's going to be kind of a tense time, because if you don't find them, you could really be mediocre or worse. And if you do find them, you could be, the kind of team that's challenging for seeding, which is what he said is now the goal. They feel like they set a foundation. This is how we're going to operate. Now, next year at this time, we want to be playing in the type of games where we're playing to improve our seed. So that's their vision. And I think this group helped I do think Griesel and Walker and Bandamel, Casey, whatever his future may be, they should be proud of that. They helped set the cement, so to speak, for what can be. But it is going to be an off season where you got to find the right pieces, and it's got to all like work together again. But that is, again, college basketball year to year now, I think.
With what they have going into the next year, Casey's decision obviously looms large. What else do you kind of feel good about them as of right now before you start, fishing in the portal? I guess, what do you feel good about that they have coming back next season and hopefully will be back, I guess, based on just how college basketball is nowadays?
Jamarcus Lawrence, you feel really good about. I mean, he was just a really confident Big Ten player who he looked like he belonged as much as anybody by the end of it. And really in the first half kind of kept them afloat in that game Wednesday. And so he's going to have a lot of confidence, and he's versatile. He's become a pretty good on-ball defender, and he's a good point. He has some point guard capabilities. Beyond that, there's guys who you're like, yeah, maybe it's going to, you wonder, like Sam Hoiberg is definitely a positive. Now where you think he fits, like if he's one of those guys you hope like can fit on a roster where he's like the 7th guy, and he comes in and you just know you're going to get quality minutes from him. Maybe that's it, but that's there now, and we didn't previously. And then aside from that, some of those guys are going to have to grow a lot in this offseason in their games. Like I know Wilhelm's dealt with some injuries and stuff like that. He's going to have to take it up a couple notches, I think. Denham Dawson's a guy I'm still intrigued by, just because I think he's a live wire, and I know his minutes diminish down the stretch, but he can be a really good defensive player, and I think sort of a kind of a garbage man type guy. And Juwan Gary's supposed to be back. So, I mean, you got Gary and Lawrence, I think, as definite starters. And then, where do you go from there? You're going to have to find, I think, at least 2 guys out of the offseason work that can kind of fit into starters roles, I think.
Yeah, no, I Probably another big. Probably got to find maybe another point guard, some wing help. I mean, it seems like that shopping list is going to be pretty long. But also, too, I mean, the one thing that I guess you can say coming out of this year is it feels like Nebraska is trending up a bit, and you have opportunity now to sell in the portal again. Minutes and pretty significant roles on a Big Ten roster. So that's always a helpful thing, I think.
And one quick name. I mean, Blaze, when Blaze was healthy, he changed their defensive metrics completely. Like I know he's got work to do on the offensive end, but I do think they would have won that game with the healthy Blaze on Wednesday, because I think he's that kind of addition defensively and cleaning up boards. So he's another piece, obviously, that'll be important.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we'll be glued to NIT bracketology for the next couple of days. We'll see where things fall, and then very, very, very closely watch the transfer portal. And every it's funny now. Every guy that enters the portal, and you always get that list of like 10 schools that have reached out right from the get-go, and it feels like Nebraska is right in the mix of those 10 schools now. They're quick on the text. So
yeah, and I mean, what they can say to those guys is at least they're not talking about a team that won 9 games this last year. They can say, hey, we won. We're 500. We're that close. You can put us over the top. We got this guy and that guy. We'll feel good about it. So that is a big part of finishing strong too. You can use that as a sales pitch.
For sure. All right. Well, Nebraska enters the transfer portal. We're going to enter a break here. When we come back, Mike Schaefer joined by Greg Biggins talking California recruiting and what Matt Rule and his staff are hoping to get done on the West Coast. Come on back.
Welcome back to the Husker247 Podcast. Mike Schaefer here, and I'm now joined by 24/7 sports analyst Greg Biggins. He's one of our top guys out on the West Coast. Greg, how long have you been involved in West Coast recruiting? Because when I first got my start, you were over at Scout. It was you and Brandon Huffman, and I'd be like trying to write about Nebraska recruiting kids on the West Coast, and I'd be like 2 weeks behind the information chasing you guys. So you've been doing it for a long time. It's kind of an honor for me to get the interview and pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, no, I was just telling the story. I kind of, 95, 96. I'm old, man. I'm old school. One of the older guys. I've been doing this longer than some people on our network have been alive, probably. So it's kind of funny, nice little segue. The 95 Nebraska team, maybe the best team of all time, right? I was just watching that game a couple nights ago. And so that was no joke. I have insomnia, and I'll lay in bed and go on YouTube. And I had just talked to Dominic Raiola about some stuff, and just got me on this rabbit trail of watching some old video of Dom at Nebraska. And then, just the 95 team against Florida was such a fun game to watch. So 95 is when I started. And, I've seen a lot of changes, man. Back then, not to go off on a tangent, but it was 900 numbers. If you want to know about Nebraska football or Notre Dame or USC, you call a 900 number, and I would try to talk really slow, and which was hard for me. And hey, breaking news next Tuesday, which you never had breaking news, but you had to make sure you had something by next Tuesday, and that's kind of when it all started. So here we are today.
Yeah, well, they definitely had some California talent. Namely front and center Lawrence Phillips on that team, but other guys too. So Nebraska's got a rich history in California. We'll start there. What do you know about Nebraska's recruiting efforts in that state? Obviously, the biggest state in the country, produces a ton of talent. And just from talking with Tony White, who's going to be spearheading Nebraska's effort out there, geographically widely different, and then the style of player is pretty different across that state. So it's a big state. Nebraska's had success all over, but what do you know about Nebraska's efforts out there?
Yeah, no, I mean, if we're talking present day, I think they've kind of been active, going back, Mike Riley, right? The Cali Nebraska movement. You can argue if that was successful or not with as much work they put in there, and Keyshawn Johnson and all that. And then even going way back, right? You mentioned Lawrence Phillips and, Ralph Brown and those guys. I think the new staff is definitely active, right? Tony White is as good as there is. He's one of my favorite guys. Covered him, and he's going to be aggressive. He's always been a great recruiter, whether he was at Syracuse or even San Diego State before then. He was one of those guys that always got in early. And being at San Diego State was hard because he'd be the first guy to see a guy, evaluate him correctly, offer him, build a relationship, and then a Power 5 school would come in late and steal him, right? And we saw that all the time with Tony. So, no, he's a grinder, and he's going to work hard. And I think, hopefully they devote more than just one guy, because I've always said about California talent. I feel like Florida and Texas, those kind of like the big three, although I'd probably put Georgia in that group right now. But the big three states, I was like Texas kids. Typically, they kind of want to stay home. Florida, same with California. For whatever reason, maybe it's because football just isn't as passionate out here, but kids are more willing to leave home than probably those other 2 or 3 big states. So if you can come in and you have a program that's hot and you can sell it, and, you talk about, preaching, development and NFL and college football playoff, and now all of a sudden NIL is a huge deal, but California players will not only listen, they'll visit, and they will leave the state without thinking twice about it.
Yeah, that kind of dovetails perfectly into one of the things that he and I were able to talk about, and you can kind of speak to this. He's a big believer that if you can get sort of a bell cow from an area that comes out and has some success for you, that he'll go back to a place in California, he'll go back to his high school, he'll be working out, and he'll be talking up your school. And he considers it off-hours recruiting. Like he's not actively having to do it. But in a place like California, that seems like that's more possible because, like you said, those guys do seem a little bit more receptive to leaving, to maybe going and experiencing the Midwest, or, and that's why we've seen teams from the Southeast come and recruit in California, because they're willing to go just about anywhere in the country to go play football.
For sure. And I think part of that also is due to, UCLA and USC being a little bit down. I think, Lincoln Riley will change things around a little bit, but during the Clay, I hate throwing stones at people who aren't around anymore. But, during the Clay Helton era, and even, early, this past year, UCLA did a little bit better, but, UCLA recruits a little bit differently. But, man, kids were flocking out of here. And, name a school. I mean, Clemson coming in here and getting DJ, and Alabama, getting Bryce Young, and, Florida State getting kids, Texas getting kids, Ohio State. I mean, you can go on and on and on. So kids will leave. And, in California, it's interesting, 7-on-7 is big out here, a little too big for me. But so all these kids know each other, right? They play together, or they play against each other. So like you mentioned, kind of like what Tony said, the off hour, I'm going to steal that one from Tony. Off hours, kind of like multi-level marketing, right? You get people to work for you.
Yeah.
No, I think these kids do talk, and they all know each other, and they're all connected. So you get one guy, that one guy talks to 12 guys, and now all of a sudden you got something.
Yeah, well, and it's not California, but it's not far from California, and it's West Coast. I mean, it feels like Nebraska is trying to do that a little bit with Dylan Raiola. The concept, if you're able to get a guy like that who's pretty well known and certainly is going to be in the ears of other recruits, just that one commitment could lead to 3 to 4 others.
I mean, he's such a good kid. I just got done saying this. I said, if all quarterback dads could be former O-linemen, the world would be a better place to live in. Because, again, I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and I've always said, man, that the dad of a quarterback is the nuttiest guy in the species. Like, it's a weird vibe. And now even moms of quarterbacks, a little bit crazy. But, Dom's not like that, man. He's old school. Dylan, former catcher. So he kind of has that, that kind of tough, rugged,
gritty,
baseball, gritty, right? And I love that. A lot of quarterbacks, man, that, if we're just being honest, a little pretty boyish, right? A little prima donna, but the best ones for me, Bryce and DJ, I mentioned them earlier, were phenomenal kids. CJ Stroud was a phenomenal kid. Nico Iamaleava was a great kid. And so is, Dylan is in that group of just being just so, whatever, the opposite of prima donna, arrogant, Dylan's the opposite of that. No, he's a very popular kid. And wherever he goes right now, I think Nebraska, USC, Georgia, he's actually flying out to Southern California where I'm at right now. He's going to be working out on Saturday out here, 3D quarterback, and then doing a USC unofficial. But I think those are the 3 schools, and whoever lands them, he's going to be an active recruiter because he's such a good kid. And I think, guys are connected with him, and he's going to be active, and he'll get, I bet, 2 or 3 elite skill guys, lineman, a D tackle. It doesn't matter what position. He's going to get guys to follow him just because of what a good kid he is and how big his personality is.
Yep. Another thing, just from that conversation, and I think this is true. It's not just a California thing. I think it's true everywhere. But you've been in the recruiting world for a while. Do you feel like it has changed? Like the first full cycle for a recruiting staff now isn't even the this Matt Rule staff came together in late 2022, so they had to throw the 2023 class together pretty quick. They also didn't get that much time to put together relationships for 2024. So when you're talking about this staff and new staffs that come together, do you almost feel like the real full effect you get is in that third class that they put together, because they get that opportunity? I'm thinking about these coaches, they get to come out and they get to visit these schools and do evaluations and start to build that relationship, and then get those kids to come for early unofficial visits and those sorts of things. Do you get the sense that the calendar or the timing that we've known with recruiting has shifted a little bit because of this?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I've never really thought of it that way. But yeah, recruiting is so sped up right now, where these 24 kids, they already kind of have their, an idea, I think, right now of where they want to go. They already kind of have their top 5 built. And what you hope, with that, and obviously Matt Rule's coming from the NFL, but yeah, that's where, bring it back to Tony, right? You hope that the staff you hire has some already built-in relationships with kids. And therefore, it's not just, the new kid in school walks into a classroom, doesn't know anybody. You hope, Tony can come in and he already has some guys, already knows some high school coaches, already kind of has built that bond. Otherwise, man, like you said, you look at the third year, and I'm not sure if you're a Nebraska fan, you're not sitting there going, "Oh, great, so I got to wait 2 more years for to see what the staff can do." I want to win right now, right? I want to see my class build something right now, and I think the portal is going to be huge for a school, like Nebraska's high school relationships. Maybe not, built in. Portal kids don't care about that, right? Portal kids, they just want to, hey, where can I play and can I get to the league? That's their highest priority. It's not going to be how many DMs I get, how many cool edits do I get? I don't care about all that. I went through that in high school. Now I want to play and I want to win and I want to go to the NFL. So I think portal could be big for Nebraska. But like you said, man, the 25 class might be the first one where we see, okay, staff now has their relationships in place. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah. Do you, in your experience, you mentioned the portal. I'm going a little off the California topic here. In your experience, just talking to recruits or talking to parents lately, did any high school recruits or parents ever kind of mention the portal as like this back pocket thing? Like, yeah, we like this other school, but maybe that's if we have to consider them later kind of thing. Yeah, is that a mentality that's out there now?
Yes.
Isn't that kind of wild?
It's weird. It's really weird for me. It's almost like I get the vibe from some people that like, okay, used to be honestly, I think maybe it takes a little bit of the risk away.
Yeah.
I feel like, well, I'm going to go to this school. It doesn't work out. Oh, well, there's always the portal I can fall back on in a year or two. Right. So it's just kind of a weird vibe when you kind of have the idea of these parents and these kids already kind of have like a plan B without even really going all in on their plan A. So but that just kind of, I feel like that's kind of where I don't want to seem like a get off my lawn. Things have changed.
Yeah. No, I got you.
But I think it has, I think the portal has made things easy. And again, out here in Southern California, man, you're seeing guys change high schools 2 or 3 times during their high school career. So it's really become, things are almost too easy. And you want guys to kind of stick around and compete, right? You want that. And I think the portal has kind of made it easy for kids to get in. But no, 100%. Kids have parents and kids have both said, there's always the portal to fall back on if it doesn't work out for me. That's literally right at the forefront of some of their conversations I've had with them.
I'm now imagining you in the 1990s on a recruiting line explaining the transfer portal and, well, if they didn't get him this time, but maybe after that sophomore year, he's going to be eyeing something.
I just spoke to a high school and that came up was the portal. And I said, you know what, you got to be careful though, because, a kid might have 20 offers out of high school, goes to college. And if they think they had those same 20 options in the portal 2 years later, I go, it's a wake up call. And that's why I think you see the portal is kind of, we have like 1 million kids in there right now who jumped in, probably thought they had a nice little landing spot. And hey, no one wants you after not doing anything for 2 years. So it's a risk. I still think it's a risk to go in there with the assumption of, well, I still have all these other schools that can fall back on. Those backup options aren't going to be there for sure. So you need to be very careful when you make that decision.
Before we dive into some specific players that I think Nebraska is kind of targeting in these next couple cycles and out in California, do you think that there's going to be a benefit to Big Ten schools of USC and UCLA joining that conference? And basically you can go into California now and be like, hey, there's a chance on the schedule we're going to be out here. Your family is going to be able to come see you play. It's going to be a homecoming game when we go play USC.
100%. I definitely saw a boost for both Colorado and Utah when they joined the Pac-12, which I don't know what's going to happen to the Pac-12 in a couple of years right now. But no, and what you just said is what they'll be able to say. And I don't know if it's going to set up where, a school like Nebraska comes and plays at UCLA and at USC in the same season, or even in the same, 1 or 2 gap year. I haven't seen the schedule, but 100% that's going to be big. Just the fact that they can go to one of those schools and, travel and see their team. I think it's going to be big. I think schools, like I said, we're recruiting something like California now with opportunity for these kids to come home. No, I think that's going to be a big selling point for sure.
Yeah. I want to dive into a couple names, and, every year I'm watching film. Like I will always have like a couple, what you call like film crushes or whatever. You just see this kid and you're like, damn, what would that look like?
Yeah.
For me right now, that's Nate Frazier.
Okay.
Because he is so incredibly fast. One, how loaded is Modern Day as a program? Because I believe that's where he's at, right?
Yes.
And because this is a kid, he had like 60 carries.
Yeah.
Like 60 carries and like 700 yards, and every highlight's like 90 yards. And, it's one thing I always get wary when you never see a kid run through contact. But it's not this kid's fault that nobody's within 10 yards of him at any time on most of these highlights.
Yeah. Should he slow down and hit somebody just because and then go ahead and run 60 yards? No, to answer the question. Well, so he's really good. He transferred into Modern Day as a receiver and, track background, 700 meter guy. And I saw him at a couple of events. I didn't see a natural, hands from him as a receiver in his body. I mean, he's a thick kid. He's got a running back body. So they moved him over. They had an injury at running back. So they moved him over to the number 2 running back, the number 1 guy, in case people are asking, how is this guy so good? And so Jordan Davidson is maybe the number 1 running back in 25 class. So I think Nebraska's already offered. He's their number 1 guy. I mentioned he's a 25 guy. Nate's a 24. So that didn't have a ton of running back tape as a freshman, sophomore. So last year kind of threw him out there, and obviously the speed jumps out. But, I did a couple Modern Day games. I do the broadcast for Valley Sports out here for SoCal high school football, and he does run hard. I mean, he's, again, mentioned track background. He does not run like a track guy at all. I mean, he's a physical kid. He's a thick kid. He's probably pushing, 200 pounds. And some guys, they have great track times, but you don't see it translate on the football field. I mean, he runs fast. Like he's 10-7 with the pads on too. His initial burst is there, the top end speed. He's explosive. He's dynamic, doesn't tiptoe around. He's one of my favorite backs. And I definitely think he's a top 200, top 250 player in the country with a big upside for sure.
Yeah. Another name, and actually 2 guys here on the offensive line, I think Nebraska has quite a bit of interest in. Hockey Finau, and you're going to have to help me here. The listeners know I'm horrible with pronunciations of names, and I try to get it right, and I try to do the best I can. But Justin Tanu, am I like 60? Tawanu.
Just say it really fast. Just say it fast.
Justin Tawanu.
We got a lot of Polynesians out here, so you kind of,
I go to Blair Angulo a lot. I'm like, Blair, how do I say this? Blair, how do I say that? You stop taking my calls.
I'm actually Hawaiian, and Blair does a better job with the Hawaiian names than I do. So Packy is, I think right now, if you're asking me, really good football player, just bumped him up to a 4-star. He should be in the 247 when March. I think it's March. Yeah, we're in March already. Gosh.
Yeah.
Later this month, I think we're doing a new March update. He should be in the 247. I think right now, recently locked in an official visit to Arizona. Washington will probably be the next school he's looking at. Nebraska's in there. They're trying. UCLA is in there. Penn State is in there. I think those are probably the main ones. And then Justin Tawanu, I think he's more of a tackle. I think Packy's probably more of a guard, but Justin is actually on a visit to Tennessee as we speak. Not sure when this is airing, but today is Friday. He's actually visiting Tennessee right now. Recently has been to UCLA and Stanford. He'll be a national recruit, and I don't think he's in any hurry to make a decision. So I think there's still time for Nebraska. I asked him, hey, other than Tennessee, any other visits coming up? He said doesn't have anything set right now. So that's where those 2 guys are at this time.
Yeah, a couple more for you here, and a couple linebackers that I know they really like. Kamar Mathuti and Dylan Williams. These are 2 guys that they would, I think, love to have. Tony White, defensive coordinator, he's got that Rocky Long background, 3.35. I think these are 2 really premium targets for him moving forward.
Yeah, probably the two most athletic linebackers. So they would really fit that Rocky Long. I love Rocky Long, man. That's old school name for me right there. That defense was weird when I was trying to figure out what
I'm excited to watch it. I'm excited to see what he does with it.
Kind of, guys are flying all over. Someone's always blitzing. You never know who. But no, Dylan, early USC commitment, backed off of that. Texas and Oregon might be the top two right now for the Long Beach Poly youngster. But no, Dylan is a really good football player. Kamari is kind of like the guy who's blown up this offseason. Went to the All-American Combine in Texas and, was a dominant guy there. We saw him, me and Huff saw him at a national preps camp a few weeks ago in Vegas, and he was probably the best player there. 3-sport athlete, basketball, track guy, two-way guy. I think rushed for, 1,300 yards last year, but had over 100 plus tackles. And he's a big, long, athletic kid that I think he has unlimited potential. So in terms of who he likes right now, he likes Washington a lot. I think I've mentioned Washington a lot right now, but yeah, Washington's involved pretty heavily with him. But he did mention Nebraska. He did mention Arizona. He did mention Cal. So he's another guy, kind of a late bloomer. So he's not any rush to narrow things down. He kind of wants to see where his whole recruitment is going to go after school, see him in the spring.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the one signee Nebraska had out of California in 2023. That would have been Sua Lafotu, the St. John's Bosco, I believe. I believe that's right. Defensive lineman.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. What do you know about him?
Yeah. No, interesting story. So mentioned Mater Dei being loaded. Bosco's the same way. Both those two schools, we kind of call them super teams because 10 years ago, the amount of players on Bosco Mater, that would be like 12 teams. But all the players are transferring into those two programs. So they have players from all over. Bosco was so deep and so loaded, so Sua was kind of a rotational guy. I mean, he's a starter and playing, the whole game on any other school. But at Bosco, they rotate 8 D linemen around. He's an inside-outside guy. He did the camp circuit before his senior year and, did really well. All of his offers came after schools got a chance to see him at some of these satellite camps. And, Washington and offered him. He committed there late summer. Those two, and I think part of it was, that he wasn't as productive. But again, it wasn't all his fault is when you're rotating, a bunch of linemen around. So him and UW kind of went their separate ways, opened things back up. Tennessee was involved. Arizona State was involved. Nebraska kind of came in late, but he took that trip. They went all in on him. He loved the visit and he committed on that trip. So I think he's got potential, again, inside outside guy, pretty big body, but he's an athletic kid. I would say he's in that, probably about 6'3", maybe 280 right now. I'm just kind of guessing from the last time I saw him. Mm-hmm. But no, I think ideally, again, and I was said Rocky in Tony's system, you can do some different things with him because he does move around pretty well for a big guy. He's a naturally strong kid. He'll be able to put on as much weight as you want him to. Again, Nebraska, always had that great strength program. So, he can be an inside guy. He can be an outside guy. He'll play hard. He's got a motor and, he's hungry and all that good stuff. So hopefully it works out. Phenomenal kid. He's a worker. Hopefully it works out for him. He's an easy kid to root for.
Yeah, absolutely. Were you, last thing for you here, were you part of the contingent that went out to the Polynesian Bowl from 247 Sports?
I was there. Yeah.
So I got to get your thoughts on not a Nebraska or not a California guy, but a Nebraska kid that went out there and showed out. Malachi Coleman. What did you think of him and what you saw during that week?
Awesome kid. Yeah, no. So it was actually Parker Thune from our Oklahoma side hit me up. He goes, "Hey, you want Malachi wants to play in the game?" And I was like, "Serious?" So I didn't even know he had it. So I actually got the chance to invite him to the game, and he was all fired up. Man, he's a gifted athlete, man. Again, we use words like upside and ceiling all the time and long-term potential. Dude, this guy just reeks of it. And I use reek in a good way, man. He's long, he's fast. They did a fastest man competition and him and Zach Branch. And if you don't know who Zach Branch is, #1 receiver in the country and the guy who ran a 10.3 as a sophomore, they raced in a 40. And I'll tell you what, Zach got him. But if that race is 2 yards longer, I think Malachi wins that race, man. He's not a long strider, man. He's a fast kid, short, long. I think he's still working on his hands. He's gonna, I didn't know what is he gonna be a receiver? Is he gonna be an outside linebacker, edge rusher, whatever? But he said receiver to start off with. He's gifted for sure, man. His body control is there. He's a tough kid. He's a competitive kid. His feet were bleeding because the cleats didn't fit right. So, but he still practiced through that, and great to get to know him. Another guy easy to root for. So I love those kids. We all love those kids that just have that length and that speed dynamic with the football in his hand. Red zone, 50-50 ball guy. I mean, you can do so much with him. And, man, I'm excited to see what happens to him in 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. Well, I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot more now that Nebraska, with Tony White and other coaches likely to be out there in California making a push back in that state. Appreciate a few minutes of your time here today and joining us here on the Husker247 podcast.
Dude, anytime, man. It's always good to catch up with you guys.
Outstanding. All right, for everybody else, be sure to check out Husker247.com. Plenty of coverage. California week rolls on. We'll have more stuff here as we get into the weekend. So be sure to enjoy that. Again, check out Husker247.com. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast anywhere where you get your podcast. Have it directly downloaded to whatever your listening device is. I'm Mike Schaefer. I'll catch you next week with another Husker247 podcast.